I can't overestimate how important dance is in driving music. Up until what the twist and that sort of era, it was driven by dance crazes. Um, so there was this huge hunger for different dances. So in 1830, people were white people were waltzing, about it, and then polkas came in and that. So seeing black dancing is a revelation. I suppose we can't just imagine people dancing on their own, how strange that looked to you. Everything else had been like set dancing, hadn't it?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, when John Jackson came to Blues Week in 2000,
John Jackson was a guitar player that's passed away from Virginia.
he mentioned playing for dances in the 30s in Virginia. They would have them for the weekend, and they were set dances. They were presumably older people doing this, because he would be young and into Blind Boy Fuller and things. But the older people were doing set dances. There were still set dances going on. That was a rural area. But the craze was being driven for novel ways of dancing. So I made a point of trying to collect as many as possible for this, and it shifts into sort of driven by black songwriters, a lot of it as well. So, for example, the buzzard lope on a steamboat, here are roustabouts, and they're actually probably buck dancing.
Okay. From this image here, this is one of your postcards.
Clogging or black dancing, and this came across. So here's the sheet music. Fred Wilson's clog dances. This is 1860, so he's got blackface, so he's meant to be imitating. But of course, clogging is also a white tradition.
Yeah.
In the Appalachians, particularly. So there's this sort of huge crossover, because the Appalachians are interesting, aren't they? Because there were relatively few African Americans. There's much more actual interaction than somewhere like Mississippi, where it was 90% African American in the late 19th century. So that's the clogging comes in, and I found a free film on the internet, in an internet archive you can use for educational purposes. It's an Edison film from 1894 of two performers from Broadway show buck dancing. So that's one of the interesting things from dancing. And then the next...
what I like about the dances, they have these names of animals, like the foxtrot, the grizzly bear.
Well, we come to this one, which is, again, from a New York show. It's an old Virginia cakewalk, and it's from 1900. Let me see. Oh no, it's earlier than that, I think. 1899, and the photo is George and Ada Walker, who also played with Burt Williams all the time.
Mm.
And Ada Walker went on after George Walker died to have a good solo career and was really famous. They were incredibly famous on Broadway. So these are shows that white, well-off people went to see on Broadway, and this is a cakewalk. And if you look on the internet, there are one or two films of cakewalks recorded in 1901 by African American dance. Well, they're minstrelsy, but we're into show people now, vaudeville, rather than minstrelsy.
Yeah, I get it.
And we're driving this. But you mentioned the animal. So this is a cakewalk, So this track,
Who's this?
it's anonymous. They don't know. So this would be a cylinder recording from 1900.
Okay.
So you walk round. But again, this is supposedly derived from slave dances on the plantation, isn't it, for the cake, which is why it's a cake walk. But this was hugely popular in New York. Again, though, it's a sort of set dance rather than individual dancing. We haven't got to individual dancing yet.
And I was thinking of Big Bill Broomsey. We talk about balling the jack from the cakewalk and concert halls. His one about balling the jack, words by Jim Burris, music by Chris Smith. The song, the big ragtime hit of 1913, was one of the first tunes with lyrics describing a dance. Other popular dances from the period were the Texas Tommy, developed in San Francisco by a black man named Johnny Peters, and the Cincinnati two-step, which came east to New York. What the title Ballin' the Jack meant nobody knew, but the dance was described as a, quote, lateral dislocation of the closely joined legs.
You mentioned the animal dances, so you've mentioned the Texas Tommy balling the jack. I'm showing a picture of the grizzly bear with Sophie Tucker, who is important.
I keep reminding people there was Sophie Tucker who Perry Bradford approached first to do the Crazy Blues. She wasn't available. Then he wound up with Mamie Smith, and that's how Mamie Smith became known for the Crazy Blues, because it was originally for Sophie Tucker.
But as we're now into the period of couple dancing, so the big movement for couple dancing was the development of cabarets in New York, 1910, 1914, where they had floor shows and people went to eat. We're talking about the 400, we're talking about the elite now. So again, often these trends are driven by the elite and then picked up to be in by the middle classes.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's there's Take Me to the Cabaret is in some of the blues songs, isn't it? But this is where you went to dance, and the most important couple were these two, Irene and Vernon Castle. He was English, and this is 1914. They did the Castle House Rag, and their house band was Jim Reese Europe, who was African American.
Yeah.
And then when he joined up, and he had a band in the American forces in the First World War in France. So I think the dancing is interesting. So I mean, we're touching on various things that you can actually pick up from the collection. I just want to show you lots of pictures, really, because one of the things that struck me, like you said earlier, was who on earth is buying this music, going to these shows, watching African Americans dance, perform? Who is the audience for this? Because you think, well, would middle class black people go to this? Possibly not. Is it are working class people affording this? No, they're not. So who is actually the audience for this? So I think one of the interesting bits, I think there's a lot more research to do on that. I'll come to Abbott and Seraph in a minute, really, but I think what you've got is you've got this interest in the new from the well-off all the time, something new, something different. It seems to have driven a lot of social artistic change all the time, really, through history. But I do think that what you're seeing, because of this interest in African American music, it creeps into the mainstream. It becomes the mainstream music. Yeah. Certainly I think quite early on. So you're listening to the minstrel music, which is a cross between a bit of African American and Irish, or Scottish, the jigs and reels and so on. So you're listening to that sort of music. Then we mustn't forget how important the Fisk Jubilee Singers and all the others were, although they were for more refined audiences usually. And we mustn't forget that people had no means of entertaining themselves apart from playing their own music, so people had to read.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few sheets that show this sort of thing. So for example, obviously people are playing piano, but this is the back of a sheet music, and it's Damon's New Orleans Coloured Students, and it's a string band with umpteen banjos, a guitar, a cello and mandolins, because there was this huge mandolin and banjo craze in the 1880s, 18 to 1914 with mandolins. So there they are. This is from 1900. So they could all read. They would all have been reading. This is vaudeville, isn't it? Because it's on the back of this, Mahara's Big Minstrel Carnival Songster, which has got written. Now, who was the music director at this point for Mahara's Minstrels? W.C. Handy.
W.C. Handy, yeah.
Who was in the band? Wilbur Sweatman.
Yeah. Who's often overlooked.
Well, he is. And also there's an association too of these instruments with African Americans. We know that there's catalogue guitars coming out in Sears and Roebuck in the 1890s onwards for $2 or $1. And this postcard is about 1905, and there he is with the guitar. Still stereotypical, playing craps. Right. So just the last thing on the audience then. Who was looking at this? Well, the Abbott and Seraph are saying that with the tent shows with Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, and with things,
they were teenagers too at the time. They were young.
Bessie Smith was very young. She
Yeah.
was mentioned in the Chicago Defender when she was 14.
Yeah.
In Ma Rainey's. Here you have a free show in the sunny south. This is early, and then you have minstrels, and you have a mixed audience watching.
Yeah.
There's white kids, black people, all sorts. So you have all this sort of thing, and I love this picture. I got this on eBay. It's a picnic in San Francisco, 1915. It's a white picnic, and there's an amazing black duo playing a very nice Gibson carved archtop thing, and a mandolin. So they're doing ragtime, string ragtime. And one last thing, Michael, for the audience. This one, I think, sums it up. From 1906, black singer, white man, very keen, white orchestra. Sounds good to me. So I think that's quite a good card to finish on. But we've got the songwriters. We haven't covered songwriters. We haven't covered the genres that it shows you, from minstrelsy up to jazz, JASS. Very few jazz sheet music. Very few.
Use the Z. It was JASS.
JASS to start
Yes.
with. I've mentioned that we've got a lot of blues song, a lot of ragtime song, because of people like Sophie Tucker with Shelton Brooks, who was a black songwriter for a long time.
She had a great song that she's known for, and I
Some
highly
of
recommend
These
it. Some of these days, there's a film
It's
of her
got
on
that
UT.
Great drop.
It's wonderful.
Isn't it?
It's
Yes.
absolutely wonderful.
Yes, and there's an interesting, you could think about an interesting connection between Jewish writers and singers and black. There's quite a connection.
And there's another song I would recommend for people to look at. This guy named Jim Jackson. He's known for We're Gonna Move to
Yes.
Kansas City.
Yes.
And he did a song called I Woke Up This Morning, She Was Gone. I woke up this morning, she was gone. Oh, she made me mad. I felt so bad. I cannot tell you the reason why. Oh, but how she loved to do the grizzly bear. Going to Frisco to find her there. 'Cause when I woke up this morning, she was gone. Then he go, oh, she was gone. You have to listen to it. It is absolutely amazing.
And that's recorded 20 years after the original sheet music.
And that's why I'm convinced that when you hear the songs, the guitar players, like what, in the tradition where I come from through the heritage,
Yes.
this was the 60s that when, the folk revival took place, and they found all these guys that recorded in the 20s and 30s, which is why Paul did his field research in 1960 when he went to America and he discovered all these people, interviewed all the blues singers around the country. But when they were recording in the 20s and 30s, the music they were recording in the 20s and the 30s was songs that was recorded 20 years earlier than that.
And I looked through my document old-timey collection yesterday, and all the early old-timey recordings were ragtime songs.
I find it amazing when you think of, and then when you look at the artists, particularly the guitar players who they had recorded after the piano period, because Paul did a talk at the University of North Carolina where he was talking about how in the 40s when he became a collector and became interested, he was saying that it wasn't until 10 years after he started collecting that he heard his first record by Robert Johnson and Charlie Patton, because they were interested in piano players, jazz. They wasn't interested in the folk blues guitar kind of 1960s. That's a 1960s kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is, what I'm now discovering is that when you hear these recordings from the 20s and 30s, that from my background, the people that recorded, they were teenagers.
Yeah.
They were in their early 20s. And so when the record companies was going down trying to find guys that they could record, they were trying to find a way to make money so that they could sell records to the market that was already there, because the market was dwindling because the sales was going down. And so as the sales was going down, we could revive the market if we can get these young guitar players to reinterpret this music, like, and play the songs all over again, like how we know Hesitation Blues, how we hear, the St. Louis Tickle, and how it's in, changed and such. These songs was already known by people. And so they were just trying to find another way to, like, what we now call tribute bands.
Well, the music business hasn't changed. It's what we're going to get and what sells.
But that was an older market too now, because if these songs were recorded in from sheet music and they were known from like the early teens, or they were known 1890s and etc. from the Edison cylinder recordings, they were trying to find a way that they can sell them to these people who were familiar with that sound, that's now probably in their 40s and 50s.
It's a bit like tribute bands, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same as today. This is 2024, and in 2024, if your popular coming of age sound was the 1980s, you would find somebody that could recreate 1980s music, and you could sell it to the people who know the 1980s.
Well, there's so many tribute bands because the psychological research is that you're very stuck on the music of your adolescence, because it's all your first experiences, and it's really very powerful and it sticks. So that's why you have 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s.
It's really interesting.
We've got 90s tribute bands.
It's really interesting.
And I think that's what a lot of this is.
Yeah.
And that's what people are performing. There's a dance by a sheet that I haven't shown you, which proves this. It's the Shimmy Wobble. It's by a black writer, Spencer Williams.
Spencer Williams was very important again.
And it's the Shimmy Wobble, and there were loads of shimmy, and they were all 1819. It's an interesting cover there. And when I was in Mississippi in 2000,
Spencer Williams was African American too, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
I saw Otha Turner and his drum and fife band, and they always play Shimmy Wobble.
This was Otha Turner and his fife and drum band.
And his fife and drum band, which is North Mississippi Hill music. So whether that's a name from the very long ago that he took, but what everybody took, and Otha Turner kept it, or Otha Turner is, it's a dance. Who knows at this point? But the connections, just to end on the recording, I just wanted to say that, for example, recordings, there is so much available on recording now, because the recording industry jumped on this from 1891 with cylinder records were being recorded. The first African American recording is the whistling one, but there's a very good book on African American recording. It's called Lost Sounds.
Lost Sounds. I had
all the recordings before 1920.
Is Lost Sounds here? Blacks and the Birth of the Recording Industry, 1890 to 1919. Tim Brooks is the author. And so, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and I said to you before, record sales. There were 4 million sales in 1900.
4 million in 1900.
30 million in 1910.
30 million, so it went from 4
to 30.
To 30.
And 100 million by 1920.
100.
And then when radio started, it fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
So that's why in the late 20s they were desperately looking for recording artists that might sell records.
There you go.
And record players were not cheap. Even in the Sears and Roebuck catalogue, they're $25 to $40, which is like 2 or 3 months' wages. So not, although you could spread the payments. And there were big sellers. So you mentioned Wilbur Sweatman, who's overlooked by the jazz people who sneer at him because he played 3 clarinets, and the blues people who think he's too jazzy.
And then you got the people that like Russell Roland Kirk, who plays the 2 horns together. Yeah, well, this was Sweatman.
He was vaudeville. We've seen him in a minstrel group when he was young. He sold 1 million discs in 1918.
Wow.
So it isn't true to say that African Americans weren't known.
They were known.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there were big artists. Burt Williams, huge artist. Burt Williams, I'm not sure how many recordings he did. He did 102 recordings, Burt Williams.
That's why I said I love that barbershop chord. Because everybody know about my background with Archie Edwards. And Archie's Barbershop in Washington, D.C. When I saw this on eBay, I had to get it. This is the early days when I saw that Burt Williams, that barbershop chord.
Yes, and he was recording from 1896.
I know. This is absolutely
because
amazing.
he was big on Broadway.
And this is 1910.
Yeah.
That barbershop chord.
So it's not true to say that there weren't big black stars.
No, that was by a long shot.
And like Abbott and Serov said, the tent shows had whites only shows late at night. So in one of their books, I think it's The Reggae But Right, which is the most interesting, it says that hundreds and hundreds of thousands of white people in the South knew Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, and various others long before they were recorded.
Yeah.
So they knew this.
Long before they were recorded.
So the audience was huge.
Yeah. So John, as we wind down, there's a black blues artist in Virginia that's a good friend of both of ours. His name is Rick Franklin. He wrote a paper, and he talked about sheet music in his paper. I'd like to conclude with his final paragraph in the paper. He says, in their time, sheet music, blackface minstrelsy, and coon songs spoke volumes about racist attitudes of mainstream America towards African Americans. In many cases, they also spoke volumes about some black composers' sense of personal pride and self-image. African American songwriters and performers who participated in this form of entertainment profited commercially, enabling them to go on to develop a new type of African American musical theater based at least in part on African American traditions. African American songwriters and performers might have also been pressured by the market value of their work and the ability to make money if they were willing to compromise their values. John, thank you for this conversation. We could go on and on because we have loads of recordings that we wanted to talk about, and maybe we'll do another talk and see what the feedback is. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.